Get some!
Welcome to TYT, I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. Cenk will be joining me later in the show. We're gonna start off the program today with a little bit of election-related news since Cenk is running for president in the Democratic primary. We are not having him comment on any election-related content in order to maintain the integrity and fairness of our coverage of these topics and more. But when he does join in the second segment of the first hour, we'll of course give you updates on what is still being carried out in Gaza. Just want to warn you all, I wasn't in the kind of mood that I'm in right now, which is in just a white hot rage. There's a video that we're going to show you later in the show that features literal premature infants that were taken off their incubators because hospitals in Gaza have completely run out of fuel. They're non-operational. Al-Shifa Hospital, one of the largest hospitals in Gaza, has been bombed and targeted relentlessly by the IDF. But it's okay, it's okay. It's okay that those infants are gonna die, likely. Because Hamas is allegedly using the hospital and all of the patients within it as human shields, so it's totally fine. It's totally fine. We can just regurgitate those talking points over and over and over again and justify the slaughter of literal premature infants. We'll get to that later. But first, let's start with this.
Much of the labor here, Latino immigrants living paycheck to paycheck. Many now view the Trump years as better for their bottom line.
Some Latino community say when Trump was a president, we don't have high gas or inflation.
Who says that President Joe Biden isn't a trendsetter? He absolutely is. He's a real trendsetter for the Democratic Party. And the trend that he has set is the bleeding of support among Black and Latino voters. In fact, CNN was in Georgia, a swing state, talking to Latino voters to see where their hearts and minds are at when it comes to the upcoming presidential election. Now, Biden remains defiant. He remains incredibly selfish. He doesn't want to drop out of the race. He's very likely to be the Democratic incumbent nominee, which means there's some likelihood that Democrats are going to lose to Donald Trump, the likely Republican nominee. And keep all of that in mind as the heart of the Biden re-election campaign is really, Trump bad, Trump dangerous, Trump will dismantle our democracy. Certainly isn't acting like it. Now, why don't we hear more from Latino voters in Georgia who explain what it is exactly that they are experiencing during the Biden administration that's making them reconsider their vote for him. Let's watch.
Are you happy with your vote for Joe Biden?
Well, I didn't see something like really change, and I didn't see changes, so I was expecting something.
Gabriela Martinez was expecting better. Both she and her husband work. They have one child, 6-year-old Roman. Every month, a struggle.
Right now, I work in 3 jobs because I have to pay more things, like my house is more expensive.
Oh, your housing is more expensive and you have to work 3 jobs in order to pay your rent or your mortgage? I mean, this isn't an uncommon situation. This is something that a lot of Americans are facing across the board. The housing crisis is something that the federal government has certainly ignored. Obviously, on a local level, we need politicians who actually give a damn and are willing to fight back against the NIMBYs, as they call it, to build more housing. None of that is happening. But the fish rots from the head down, and the Biden administration is getting blamed for a lot of the economic heartache that Americans are feeling, including many of the voters who were thought to be mainstays of the Democratic electorate, the Democratic base, Black and Latino voters. Now, the polling doesn't look so great for Biden. We've talked about a lot of different polls that show that Biden is sliding down the polls, whether it has to do with swing states, whether it has to do with certain demographics that Democrats have traditionally done really well with. And I want to give you some more information about recent polls and what they're saying about Biden. According to Axios, it's clear from consistent trends across multiple polls that Biden is bleeding support among Hispanic voters and black voters, especially younger ones, and especially in swing states. Things are looking real great for Biden, right? There's more. Biden is morphing into Trump when it comes to his base. It's old and white voters who seem most solid in their support. Quote, Biden has retained the entirety of his support among older white voters, the New York Times' Nate Cohn writes. And of course, just to dip back into that New York Times Siena College poll, which we did extensive coverage of last week, you should know that when it comes to certain demographics, Biden not doing so well. Biden's support among non-white voters dropped a whopping 33 points compared to 2020 results. And I want to pause for a second because remember, Biden did well in the popular vote for sure, but we don't decide presidential elections based on the popular vote, as you all know. If you look at how Biden performed in the swing states, he barely won by a slim margin. So when it comes to swing states, he needs all the support he can get. And the fact that he is bleeding support among black and Latino voters, the fact that he's bleeding support among those in swing states should be alarming to a party that is incessantly fear-mongering about the inherent danger that another Trump term would pose to our democratic system, our democratic process. But they sure don't act like they see Trump as a threat. Because if they genuinely saw Trump as a threat, there would be this urging of Biden to step down, to actually follow through on his promise to not run for re-election. He said he was gonna run for one term and be done with it. Obviously he lied, and obviously he is just undeterred, unwilling to look at the facts on the ground and make a decision that would be far better for the future of the country, but he's unwilling to do that. There's more. Trump's support among black voters popped to 22 points, which the Times called unseen in presidential politics for a Republican in modern times. Trump has increased his support among black voters. He's also increased his support among Latino voters. And why is that? Well, obviously you have Trump constantly touting how great the economy was under his watch. To some extent that was true. And a lot of the blame that Biden is getting right now isn't necessarily his fault. Now, inflation is a huge problem, right? But inflation it has different causes depending on which sector of the economy you're looking at. He could have done something to help Americans when it comes to the housing crisis, but he fell short on that. And that is one of the biggest areas of inflation that is just absolutely destroying the personal finances of American families across the country. Oil prices are obviously extremely high. What you pay at the pump, it's gone down a little bit, but all throughout the summer, it was extremely high. Paying for gas was unbearable, and high gas prices translates to inflation everywhere else in the economy, because think about it, you gotta transport products. If the cost of transporting the products is higher due to high fuel prices, then the products that you're buying are going to see an increase in price. One of the things that Biden tried to do was he went to Venezuela and he worked with them to lift some of the sanctions likely to increase the oil supply by the OPEC plus cartel. But Americans have been drowning economically for quite some time now, and the help hasn't come soon enough. It hasn't made really much of a dent when it comes to the stability that Americans are facing, and it is hurting Biden in the polls. So if they think that all they need to do is fearmonger about Trump and that's somehow gonna convince people who have, turned on Biden, I think they're mistaken, and I think they're playing with fire. Biden's lead among Hispanics is in single digits in the 6 swing states polled: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Democrats typically win among Hispanics by 30 plus points, but not anymore. And look, it's not just the New York Times poll either. A CNN poll earlier this month showed Biden with 4% lead over Trump among Latino registered voters. Do you guys understand how disastrous that is? As long as I could remember, Democrats had the Black and Latino vote on lock. Now, they're significantly bleeding support among Latino voters. The majority of Black voters still support the Democratic Party, but the fact that more and more Black voters are turning on the Democratic Party and kind of eyeing Trump for a second term should tell you a lot about where the hearts and minds are of the American electorate and how frustrated they are with the situations in their households, with their finances. They don't feel that the government is looking out for them. Now, take that frustration and couple it with one of the few speeches that Biden has given to the American public. I mean, you don't really see him out in public that often. He doesn't do regular press conferences. Oh, but he got ready and he was willing to give a speech demanding that Congress approve $106 billion in war funding. See, when it comes to war funding, when it comes to us serving as an ATM for either Ukraine or Israel, there's no question about it, right? We shouldn't have a debate. When it comes to increasing the funds for our Defense Department, there's really no debate about it. It's a bipartisan effort. That type of legislation passes easily. But when it comes to helping Americans who are struggling right now, that's when the nickel and diming happens. And Americans aren't stupid. They see it. They see those debates. They see the dumb excuses, the nonsense about the Senate parliamentarian and the legislative filibuster in the Senate that prevents the passage of these economic policies that would benefit the lives of Americans. We didn't hear anything about the, legislative filibuster in the Senate when Trump was president. We didn't hear anything about the Senate parliamentarian when Trump was president, because Trump had no problem pressuring and bullying, coercing, whatever he wanted to do, whatever he needed to do to get what he wanted. But with Biden, it's interesting how he won't even fight for his own policies. And the American people see it. They're not blind, they're not stupid. Now, the economy is definitely not an area where voters are giving Biden a lot of credit, despite Bidenomics, if you will. Higher interest rates are also hurting Americans. It's obviously far more expensive to borrow, far more expensive to take out a mortgage for a home. And according to yet another poll, a new poll by the Financial Times and University of Michigan, 31% of Democratic respondents said that since Biden moved into the White House in January of 2021, they have become either somewhat or much worse off, while just 24% said their position has improved. A combined 16% say they are somewhat or much better off under Biden, just 16%, guys, while 32% say they're somewhat worse off and 23% say they're in a much worse financial position. And we also know that Latino voters are unhappy about more than just the economy. So why don't we hear yet another Latino voter in Georgia and what he had to say about what it's like living in Biden's America.
Aquino says he's a Democrat, but worries about the economy and crime.
In Atlanta?
Here in Atlanta, he says many people are thinking bad things about murder and crime.
Pensando cosas malas.
Diego Monsalve has lived in Atlanta and cut hair for 17 years. The candidate who will get his vote, the one he believes will improve both the economy and bring down crime.
Do you have a candidate in mind, or are you in the medio? Are you in the middle?
Yo estoy mirando, checando cuál será el mejor.
So you're open to Democrat or Republican?
I was under the impression that Democratic voters aren't concerned about crime at all, that it's all made up in their heads, that they have a perception of crime. But crime actually doesn't exist. There's no crime wave. No one's concerned about it. Everything is hunky-dory, and we should all just shut up and accept, what the situation is on the ground. You see increases in car thefts, property crime. In some cities, depending on where you live, you'll see a pretty sharp increase in violent crime, but it's okay. Democratic voters love it. They support it. They're totally fine with it. We should ignore when they bring up these issues because they don't really mean it, right? Now, last week I shared details about how Biden has lost a significant amount of support among Arab Americans, especially in states like Michigan, a swing state that's incredibly important for Biden if he wants to win in 2024. We've talked about the Latino vote in this segment, so keep those two demographics in mind as you hear one of his minions, Jen Psaki on MSNBC, engage in the very fear-mongering that I was referring to earlier to basically browbeat Americans into voting for someone who they're unhappy with. Let's watch.
He also has plans for sweeping raids of undocumented immigrants, mass deportations, and the creation of giant camps. He wants to restate the Muslim ban, something he also repeated this weekend. And when he was asked about it this week, about how the US can stop the killing of innocent people in the Israel-Hamas war, he basically said we should just let it all play out. And yet, the hand-wringing and cocktail party speculation about an alternative to Joe Biden is continuing, will continue. Guess what? Joe Biden isn't perfect. No candidate is, by the way. But we have to understand what the alternative is here.
Joe Biden sucks. We all acknowledge that. But Trump is scary and bad, and he's going to do all of these culture war things that you're not gonna like. Look, it worked in 2020. And what helped Biden in 2020 was how poorly Donald Trump handled the coronavirus pandemic. I'm not so sure it's gonna work this time around. I really don't think it will. And again, if the Democratic establishment is genuinely convinced that Donald Trump poses a significant threat to this country and our democratic process, they need to act like it and they need to run better candidates. But Biden's selfish, he's defiant, and would rather risk it all because he just wants to serve a second term. It's all about him, and we're supposed to pretend like it's not selfish. Anyway, we gotta take a break. When we come back, Cenk Uygur will be joining me to talk about the horrific conditions on the ground in Gaza, including what is transpiring in every single hospital in the Gaza Strip. It is, buckle up, we'll be right back.
TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. We have a lot of stories to get to. Obviously some disastrous stories coming out of Gaza in just a second. And then later, disastrous stories coming out of Donald Trump. Several different ones. Okay, buckle up, brace for impact on all of this. But we got the news to deliver for you guys, Anna.
Starting with this.
Mr. Prime Minister, as you know, a number of the protesters are protesting the actions by Israel. Even the Secretary of State saying, quote, far too many Palestinian civilians have been killed. Let me ask you this. How many civilian deaths are you willing to bear in order to achieve your ultimate goal of eradicating Hamas?
If I had my way, there wouldn't be a single civilian death. If I had my way, no civilians would be killed. If Israel had its way and our calls would be heeded, they'll all be out of harm's way.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did his best to launder his reputation as he engages in the slaughter of Palestinian civilians, and that continues not only in Gaza, but the brutality against Palestinians in the West Bank continues as well. In reality, the high volume of civilian casualties, along with the continued and relentless airstrikes and bombardment of the Gaza Strip, prove otherwise. So let me make my case. Let me make my case. So the latest controversial act by the IDF under the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu has to do with one of the largest hospitals in Gaza, known as Al-Shifa. In Gaza City, Al-Shifa Hospital is caught in Israel's ground offensive aimed at destroying Hamas, and the compound has been repeatedly hit by strikes, one of which Hamas health officials said destroyed the cardiac ward on Sunday. Gaza City's Al-Quds hospital went out of service due to lack of generator fuel, the Palestinian Red Crescent said. Now, witnesses at Al-Shifa told AFP by phone on Sunday that violent fighting had raged around the hospital the whole night. Inside, doctors said Saturday that 2 babies had died in the neonatal unit after power to their incubators was cut off, and a man had also died when his ventilator shut down. I mean, what could Israel do, right? We've been told that they believe that Hamas is operating in the tunnels underneath the hospital. So of course they have to bomb the hospital. Of course they have to cut off power and resources to that hospital and every other hospital in the Gaza Strip. Of course they have to do that. God forbid they send IDF soldiers in the tunnels to actually fight the Hamas militants that they claim are operating in the tunnels under the hospitals. God forbid they do that. Instead, they do this. Let's take a look.
Health organization is now saying Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest, most important medical facility in the Gaza Strip, is effectively no longer functional. There is no running water. There is no electricity. There is the bare minimum of medical operations going on at this point. There are some 600 patients inside the hospital, Andrea, but no case is more urgent than the dozens of prematurely born babies who were being held in the neonatal unit there. The electricity is gone. Those newborns, some of them younger than this war itself, have been taken out of their incubators. They were, last we heard, being held in the surgery unit at Al-Shifa Hospital. Dozens of tiny, tiny Gazans on 2 beds being kept together, swaddled to try to keep them warm. In some cases, medical officials respirating them with their hands, trying to keep them breathing, basically doing everything they can to keep them alive. Hospital officials tell us at least 3 of these newborns have died so far.
Benjamin Netanyahu and the current Israeli far-right government, they're monsters, okay? They don't care. They will justify the slaughter of those babies by just simply regurgitating the same tired talking point over and over and over again. Israel has a right to defend itself. They're using Palestinian civilians as human shields. Human shields, human shields, human shields, human shields. All we have to do is repeat that like robots and completely deny the humanity of the Palestinian civilians that are being bombarded by airstrikes day in and day out. Okay, there are dead bodies laying all over the Gaza Strip. And Palestinians who want to bury their loved ones are terrified to go retrieve those bodies because they know that they might die, that they might be attacked, that they might be fired at if they do that. Okay, so their loved ones' bodies are on the roads, just rotting away, decomposing. But Israel has a right to defend itself. And I guess they get to defend themselves however they want. Any war crime they'd like to do. We get to hold Israel to a much lower standard when it comes to war crimes. An even lower standard than Americans held their own government. Cenk, what do you have to say?
So a lot. First off, would you guys do it? I'm asking you as human beings. Let's say that you thought they were terrible guys. Just imagine the worst guys you can imagine. I don't know how many of them, 2, 10. Let's just assume that Israel's telling the truth. Let's assume America's telling the truth, that there's a group of Hamas guys underneath the hospital. Let's say it's a big number, 20, okay? And there's hundreds of sick people in the hospital and wounded, and there's those babies. Would you bomb the hospital? Would you shoot at the hospital? Would you cut off the water and electricity to the hospital, knowing that those babies are gonna die and a lot of those sick people are gonna die? I wouldn't do it. I say I'm gonna find a different way to get those bad guys, but I'm not gonna kill the people inside the hospital. And by the way, how does that help get the terrorists underneath the hospital?
It doesn't. And
how does dropping a bomb or cutting off the water and electricity to a hospital where then you lose the power to the incubators, how does that get the terrorists underneath the hospital that are in the tunnels that have nothing to do with even the electricity or the water connected to the hospital? The tunnels go all across. Even if it were true, how does it help get them? It doesn't. Would you do it anyway? Would you kill those dozens or hundreds of people? I wouldn't do it. That's sick. What kind of weirdo vengeance is that? Okay, so then let's go to the excuses that Anna mentioned. Look, I keep bringing this up because it's unfortunately a haunting analogy. And I know because I grew up with Turkish propaganda. And the Ottoman Empire used to say, we had a right to defend ourselves. The Armenians attacked us from within when we were in the middle of fighting off foreign armies like the Russians. We had a right to defend ourselves. And the Armenian terrorists were hiding inside the civilians. So what do? We had a right to defend ourselves by killing all those people. And we got a couple of the Armenian rebels that were rebelling against the empire. We had a right.
Can I jump in on that, Cenk? Because the exact same excuses were used by the Turks in regard to their slaughter of Armenian civilians. They argued, well, the group of people, Armenians, who we had been oppressing as religious minorities, they fought back. With the help of Russia, they fought back and they committed atrocities. And so that gave them, in their minds, the right and the excuse to slaughter 1.5 million Armenians. And by the way, that was 1.5 million Armenians. You wanna know how many Palestinians have already been internally displaced in Gaza? 1.5 million, okay? Nowhere to go, they're told to go to the south, and then the south gets bombed. They get bombed as they're fleeing the north to the south. They don't have enough humanitarian aid, not even close. None of the hospitals are operational, Cenk, none of them. Take it away. I mean, what exactly would you call that? How exactly are people supposed to survive when not a single hospital is operational because they won't allow fuel into the Gaza Strip? Explain that to me.
So 1.5 million people displaced, 45%, it's about half obviously, of homes destroyed or damaged. That means like, they wiped out the whole place. 18 hospitals already closed, 40 health centers already closed, 1,100 civilians dead, at least 4,600 children dead. Let me ask you guys another question. Please be honest with yourselves. If Hamas had done the same to Israel, what would people call it? If they said, well, we were trying to target Israeli soldiers and we got a bunch of Israeli soldiers, but we killed 11,000 Israelis and we moved 1.5 million of them and we wiped out half the homes in Israel, half the homes, and we bombed a whole bunch of hospitals. But hey, those people were collateral damage in our fight. What would we call that? As they bombed and bombed Jews and Israelis. We'd probably call it a genocide, right? But when Israel does it to Gaza, does it to the Palestinians, you have nothing but nonsense talking points. So look, if it breaks your heart to hear this, if you're on the side of continuing to kill Palestinians inside Gaza, I'm sorry, but you got to look into your soul and say, is this okay? Is this okay in your name? Are you comfortable with it? I'm not comfortable with it. I hope to God you're not comfortable with it, but I've got more. So if you're an evangelical Christian in America and you claim to be pro-life your whole life, you see those babies dying, are you still okay with it because you think Jesus is gonna come back and you need the slaughter of the Jews and the Muslims in the area and to giant conflict like this so that you can get to end times and Jesus? Are you pro-life or aren't you pro-life? Are you okay with this? If you're okay with this and you really think you're a Christian, look in the mirror, look in the mirror. Okay, I want to give credit to MSNBC for running that report. I want to give Andrea Mitchell credit for not only running that, but then aggressively questioning US officials about their excuses, saying basically something similar to what Anna said, which is, even if you thought they were terrorists under the hospital, does that justify killing people inside the hospital? And then Netanyahu, if you're being honest about it right now, he has become Hamas's best friend. Why? Number one, nobody's talking about the savagery of Hamas anymore because now Netanyahu has killed 10 times as many civilians. So now the whole world is busy condemning Israel. Israel had everybody on their side and everybody was condemning Hamas. And Netanyahu took that goodwill and burned it. And instead he killed 10 times as many civilians. And now the whole world is condemning Israel. And Hamas has got to be thinking, how did we get so lucky? And he's barely gotten any of the Hamas fighters. And all he's doing is killing Palestinian civilians. And Hamas is thinking, when they leave, we're going to be in much stronger shape, much, much stronger. Because every Palestinian in Gaza now is got to be enraged with this. Can you imagine being inside Gaza and not being enraged with Israel? And then finally on the Hamas issue, now the whole world is talking about this occupation is unbelievably brutal. So
not the US though.
Except
the US,
for US officials.
Yeah,
the American
US
people
officials, terrorist sympathizers. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you were trying to help Hamas, you couldn't help them any more than Netanyahu just helped them.
you guys something, okay? Because I am curious, and I'm going to go to a UN report. This is a UN report, okay? So anyone who's already jumping down our throats is like, this is Hamas propaganda. Sit down, you're going to be all right, okay? Let's go to graphics 13 and 14 because I'm curious. Were Hamas militants operating under every single one of these buildings? According to a recently released report from the UN surveying a preliminary aerial assessment of structural damage in Gaza, 45% of the homes in Gaza have been destroyed or damaged. 45% of the homes in Gaza have been destroyed or damaged. More than 40,000 destroyed housing units have been destroyed, and over 222,000 have been partially damaged, the report found. So were Hamas militants operating in every one of those buildings that were destroyed by the IDF? Is that what happened? I'm curious. Yeah. I'm curious because that's the excuse that we get. By the way, we're told over and over again, don't trust anything that comes out of Hamas. Don't trust anything that comes out of Gaza because it's controlled by Hamas. Am I supposed to take every talking point coming from the IDF and the Israeli government at face value? They just justify everything they do by saying, oh, there are Hamas militants operating in the tunnels underneath. First of all, can I see some evidence of that? Is there any proof? Or are we just supposed to take what Israel says at face value? Because I refuse to do that. Netanyahu, in the context of that interview that we just showed you, lied incessantly. In fact, why don't I show you the next video where he makes a pretty bold claim about what Israel was willing to do for the very hospitals that have been brutalized by the IDF. Let's watch.
Let's talk about what's happening at Al-Shifa Hospital. There are reports that there's been a loss of power, which has caused the death of patients and even some infants. And I know that Israel has said Hamas is headquartered there. Even if that is the case, does that justify jeopardizing the lives of sick people and babies, Mr. Prime Minister?
No, on the contrary, we offered actually last night to give them enough fuel to operate the hospital, operate the incubators and so on, because we have obviously no battle with patients or with civilians at all. And I think every civilian death, every dead baby is a tragedy. But that tragedy should be placed squarely at the responsibility of Hamas, that is keeping its military installations inside hospitals, its command posts inside hospitals, inside schools, inside UNRWA, UN facilities, and so on. So we obviously don't want to give them immunity, but at the same time, we're sensitive to this issue. So we offered this help. They've refused it.
He's a liar. He's an absolute liar. In fact, here's what the director of the hospital had to say. Not Hamas, the director of Al-Shifa Hospital. Al-Shifa director Mohammed Abu Salmiya told journalists the Israeli claims were lies. The 300 liters the army said had been delivered would power generators for no more than a quarter of an hour anyway, he said. So maybe they did deliver a tiny amount of fuel just to save face, just so Netanyahu can go on national television in the United States of America, which is aiding and abetting the slaughter of innocent civilians, to pretend as though he's a humanitarian. He's actually looking out for the Palestinian civilians. But the numbers would say otherwise, wouldn't they, Cenk? Because you look at the numbers, let's go to graphic 10, Israel's relentless campaign in response to what Hamas did has killed at least 11,180 people in Gaza. Also mostly civilians and including 4,609 children. Oh, what a humanitarian, Netanyahu is. He's so kind for cutting off fuel, humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, for displacing 1.5 million Gazans from northern Gaza, and then proceeding to bomb southern Gaza as these people were fleeing for their lives. What a humanitarian. Wow, we should all give him a round of applause and take everything he says at face value.
Yeah, so there's no dispute that 300 liters would power the hospital for about a quarter of an hour. So that's some sort of sick joke and obvious propaganda. And Netanyahu knows that. And he goes, you see how cool and collected he is? He goes on TV and he's like, we offered them fuel for the hospital, they wouldn't take it. Absurd. And by the way, everybody in the hospital says that's nothing but a complete lie. And even if it was true, again, it would last a quarter of an hour. He's taunting them. Yeah, I'm killing the people inside the hospital. Ha ha, I gave you an extra quarter hour to live before they all die. It's unbelievably sick, not in my name. So wonderful Jewish protesters in America have been saying Not in our name, not in our name. But all Americans should say, not in our name, because our government is helping them to do this. And so then they say, oh, well, we question the numbers because technically, Hamas runs Gaza and these hospitals are inside Gaza. So the Palestinian Health Ministry is connected to Hamas, so we don't believe the numbers. Okay, so, but everybody knows the numbers are relatively correct, meaning they're in the ballpark. The United Nations has confirmed them. So what's your big claim? It's not 11,000, it's 10,500? You didn't bomb one hospital, but you bombed the other 18 hospitals. How does any of that help? It doesn't help at all. It's just an incredibly weak excuse to try to deny culpability. Oh, don't believe any of the numbers. Don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe the dead babies. Don't believe anything. Only believe our propaganda. Sorry, we don't agree. We don't believe you. And then the last lie is no intent. We had no intent to kill civilians. We just happened to destroy half the buildings in Gaza, and we happened to kill 11,000 civilians because the Israeli Defense Forces, apparently, according to their own supporters, are the most incompetent military in the history of the world. They just can't shoot straight. They just keep killing and killing and killing civilians. Boops, every time it's an accident, every time. No, sorry, a couple of times they got a couple of Hamas guys. So what, 98%? Now what number would you like, 95%, 90% of the time? It's collateral damage. We just accidentally happen to drop bombs all over Gaza and we happen to kill civilians ad nauseum, but we didn't intend it. If you think they didn't intend it, you're a schmuck. You're and you're so biased you can't see straight. I'm sorry, I love you brothers and sisters, but you can't possibly think that they didn't intend this.
The World Health Organization said the situation inside the Al-Shifa hospital was dire and perilous, and it was not functioning as a hospital anymore. That's the World Health Organization, not Hamas, not the Gaza Health Ministry, okay? The World Health Organization. Let's go to graphic 6. People fleeing the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City were shot at by surrounding Israeli forces. Doctors Without Borders claimed on Saturday. They're trying real hard not to kill civilians, guys. They don't want to kill civilians. Their heart breaks for the civilians who are dying as part of this war. At the time of writing, our staff are witnessing people being shot at as they attempt to flee the Al-Shifa hospital. MSF, that's Doctors Without Borders in the region, urgently reiterates its calls to stop the attacks against hospitals, for an immediate ceasefire, and for the protection of medical facilities, medical staff, and patients. I mean, you have organizations not tied to Hamas in any way. These are international organizations like the World Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, telling you exactly what's happening on the ground, telling you that civilians are being targeted, that hospitals are being bombed, refugee camps getting bombed, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. And we're supposed to sit here and stomach the lies told to us by the very man who failed to keep his own civilians safe in Israel on October 7th. We're supposed to take him at face value. No, I refuse. He's a liar. And he doesn't give a damn about those civilians. His actions speak louder than words. Any final thoughts, Cenk?
Guys, every day that our government, the United States government, green lights this massacre is a day that more babies are gonna die, more children are gonna die. Imagine being in that rubble. Imagine being in that city and there's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide, there's no electricity, there's no water, people are starting to starve. And everyone inside Gaza, from journalists to American nurses, to Doctors Without Borders, to the United Nations, to the World Health Organization, are all reporting the same thing: non-stop civilian deaths. And there's nowhere to run because it's an open air prison. They're just dropping bombs and firing indiscriminately. Yes, I said indiscriminately, okay? And I don't care if your feelings are hurt. Well, I care about those dead children. And the US is now saying, oh yeah, those bombs that are being dropped into your head, made in the USA, we're gonna send them another $14 billion to kill more Palestinians. No, not in our name, not in our name. That $14 billion should not be sent. We should not send a single dollar to the state of Israel from here on. Otherwise, we're culpable. Otherwise, the whole world, not just the Muslim world, the whole world looks at us and goes, what kind of monsters would greenlight these massacres and send them more money to murder more civilians? And then don't pretend, oh, I don't know why people hate us. I don't know why.
They're jealous of our democracy, Jim.
Oh, yeah.
They're jealous of our democracy, yeah.
Okay. And by the way, last thing, end the occupation. Are you insane? Are you insane to say that people should be brutalized like this? Are you insane? You're gonna say, no, we're gonna keep them in open air prisons. We're gonna imprison the Palestinians, and we're gonna commit any violence we like, anytime we want on them, all accidentally. Is the occupation of 56 years an accident? No. You are Jews across the world through time have been the oppressed. And my heart goes out to the Jewish community for all of the oppression that they have suffered. Unfortunately, now Israel, in this different situation, has become the oppressors. And there's really no argument about that at all. The Palestinians are not occupying Israel. The Palestinians are not preventing an Israeli state. It is the Israelis that are occupying and brutalizing the Palestinians. They have enormous military might, and they have the United States of America, the greatest military ever built, all behind them. They have all of the might, pretending that Israel is the victim in what's happening in Gaza. Oh, poor little Israel, poor tiny little Israel with its giant bombs and its giant military. They're the victims as you destroy half of Gaza, as you kill all those civilians? No, they were the victims on October 7th, and our hearts went out to them. Now they are not the victims. They are the oppressors. And the occupation is nothing but pure oppression. If you tell yourself pretty little lies about, oh, well, they're Muslim savages, they needed to be oppressed so they know their place, you don't realize you're being deeply, deeply racist. And I won't stand for it. We shouldn't send Israel a single more dollar. I want Israel to be a beautiful, great country, but this ain't it. And as long as their government is brutalizing Palestinians and killing civilians and keeping them in prison for decade after decade, not a single dollar should go to Israel. And by the way, you're crazy to visit Israel now. No one should go to Israel. No one at all. Why would I go support Israel? After that's like sanctioning their government's brutality of Palestinians. No, they should be cut off from the whole world until they stop being the oppressors. And then welcome back, and we love you, brothers and sisters, because we're all humans at the end of the day. Treat the Palestinians as humans, and then you're welcome back to the rest of the world. Until then, you are clearly the oppressors, and it's not even close.
Apparently, there are some members of the State Department who agree, and they have written a letter of dissent to the Biden administration and the State Department. We'll give you more details on that and more when we come back.
Back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Also, Vili Bajani, thank you for joining. We appreciate you. You could do that through the button below or tyt.com/join. We appreciate all of you that allow this show to happen, and those are our members. Anna.
Well, luckily, there are some people with a conscience within the United States government who are trying to get the Biden administration to rethink their unwavering support for Israel. So let's get into it. Today, Axios obtained a copy of an internal dissent memo signed by 100 State Department and United States Agency for Internal Development employees that absolutely blasts the Biden administration and its unwavering, committed support to Israel's brutal actions in Gaza. Now, the 5-page memo, which was sent to the State Department Policy Office about a week and a half ago, opens by acknowledging what I think everyone accepts. They acknowledge the brutal terrorist attacks and atrocities carried out by Hamas on October 7th. So they are in no way minimizing that. They are in no way justifying that and making very clear that Israel, yes, does have the right to defend themselves. But they also make clear that Israel, like any other country on this globe, does not have the right to carry out its own atrocities and its own war crimes. And that is currently what is happening right now. Now, Axios reports that, again, the rest of the letter is spent criticizing Israel's counterattack. Here's what it reads. Members of the White House and the National Security Council displayed a clear disregard for the lives of Palestinians, a documented unwillingness to de-escalate, and even prior to October 7th, a reckless lack of strategic foresight. And I have to say, I really appreciate that last sentence, because what's happening right now didn't happen in a vacuum. And the United States has shown unwavering support for the Israeli government, regardless of what the Israeli government consists of. Are they left-wing politicians, far-right politicians? Doesn't matter. You have to support Israel no matter what. The United States government has provided support for Israel regardless of which kinds of responses or war crimes they've carried out that has disproportionately impacted and killed Palestinian civilians. Now, without offering a specific example, the memo also accuses the Biden administration of spreading misinformation in his October 10th speech, supporting Israel, and one of the signature addresses of his presidency. But then they also do get a little specific when they mention this. The memo also criticized Biden for questioning the number of deaths in Gaza. Remember, Biden did seek to provide cover and help launder the reputation of Israel's current government by pouring cold water on the notion that all these civilians have died in the Gaza Strip. You shouldn't believe it because the Gazan health ministry is controlled by Hamas and they're lying. Except the State Department under Biden uses those figures in their official documents. Historically speaking, you can compare the numbers of casualties reported by the Gaza Health Ministry to what other independent sources on the ground had reported about the number of casualties. They're very similar. If anything, there have been instances of the Gazan Health Ministry undercounting the number of casualties, civilian casualties. The memo also accuses Israel of committing war crimes against the Palestinian people, which is language that the Biden administration has absolutely avoided like the plague. They write, quote, "Yet we have failed to reassess our posture toward Israel. We doubled down on our unwavering military assistance to the Israeli government without clear or actionable red lines." And the memo also said that we strongly recommend that the United States government advocate for the release of hostages by both Hamas and Israel. I love that they mention this because this never gets mentioned. They cited the thousands of Palestinians being held in Israel, including those without charge. There's more, Cenk, but I'm curious what you think about this. I mean, this isn't the first time that people within the Biden administration have spoken out about, the US government's unwavering support for the Israeli government and what they're carrying out. Do you think this time it'll change something?
No. I love those people and I appreciate them. And that's what makes our government great and special in our country, that we allow for dissent like that. When Trump was in charge, he squashed all dissent, and now he's talking about arresting people who dissented against him in his own government if he gets back into power. Now, Biden, to his credit, is not doing that. And he's not saying, we're gonna arrest these people or fire them all or replace them with shock troops or anything along those lines. But that's as far as I'll go for credit for Biden. On the other hand, as these people in his own administration who signed up to do work that they thought was going to be good for the world are saying, we're co-signing on this. We can't keep killing all these civilians. It's unbelievable what we're doing. These are things that we call war crimes to other countries all the time. It's not close. They're definitely war crimes. And that's not me saying it, that's 100 people inside the United States State Department saying it. And is it gonna move Biden an inch? No way. Biden has always been a warmonger. He voted for the Iraq war. He's voted for almost every war we've ever gotten involved in. He always huffs some puffs and goes, "Oh well, I wish it was. I wish we had other options, but war's the only option, and that's the option I always vote for. Golly gee, I put a lot of thought into this, but I think us and our allies should continue to kill as many people as possible, and war is great." And if you're doubting that about recent, because some people think, Biden is a big changed man. He's now FDR. You remember when progressives were saying that in Washington? Forget other Democrats. Progressives who are totally suckered into the Biden administration and co-signing on all of their nonsense. He's the new FDR. Well, how about the Iran deal? It was Barack Obama's deal. It was great. It brought us peace. It took the uranium out of Iran so they couldn't develop a nuke. It was working great. Then Trump comes in, butchers it, takes us out of the deal, makes war much more likely. And what does Biden do? Why not just go right back into the deal the first day? No, he co-signs Trump and says, no, I'm not going back into that deal. I prefer war. Peace, we had a perfectly great peace deal under Obama. I don't want it. I don't want it. Instead, I want more conflict, more war, more money being spent on defense contractors, which also happen to finance me. But anyway, so is he gonna listen to people that have morality in his own State Department? There's absolutely no chance of that.
So these memos will continue happening. This isn't the first one. There are State Department officials who have resigned because of their disagreement with how the Biden administration is handling this ongoing war. And so the only thing that gives me solace is knowing that there are some people within our State Department, within our federal government, who see what's happening in a very sober way, and they understand that there are war crimes being committed by our ally, the Israeli government. And I don't know how this all ends. But what I do know is Biden has been an incredible disappointment in how he's handled this situation. You're right, he's likely to continue supporting Israel regardless of what it does.
And by the way, Netanyahu, not just other Israeli officials, but Netanyahu has said many, many times, Joe Biden never questions us. He's a great ally to my government. Yeah, if he writes you a blank check and lets you kill as many civilians as possible, of course you're gonna be his biggest fanboy. So right now, the whole world is disgusted by what Netanyahu and his government is doing, with one notable exception, Joe Biden.
Yeah. All right, I want to wrap up today's coverage of this brutal, horrific story by talking about how there is some fear that this war is going to expand to countries like Lebanon. And that's not just me saying it, even the warmongers within Biden's administration are concerned about it. Concerns about Israel's war in Gaza spreading to other countries in the region are now being expressed by Biden administration officials, if you could believe it. Now, in a call with his Israeli counterpart, Yoav Gallant, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin raised alarm over Israel escalating tensions with Lebanon. Axios broke this story, reporting that Austin's message to Gallant reflected growing anxiety in the White House that Israeli military action in Lebanon is exacerbating tensions along the border, which could lead to a regional war. Wow, it's amazing. It seems like even in the Biden administration, there are some people, including someone like Lloyd Austin, convinced that Israel is acting in a belligerent manner and is gonna drag not just Israel, but the United States into a regional war, okay? Men and women in our armed forces are currently being attacked by rocket fire as a result of this. But let me give you more details. One US official said that the White House asked Austin to express concern to Gallant about the escalating Israeli military action in Lebanon. Let me give you a few examples. Some in the Biden administration are concerned Israel is trying to provoke Hezbollah and create a pretext for a wider war in Lebanon that could draw the United States and other countries further into the conflict, according to sources briefed on the issue. Israeli officials flatly deny it. They can deny it. They deny a lot of things, but their actions speak for themselves. The Israeli press reported that several days after the war broke out, Gallant and several senior IDF commanders wanted to conduct a wide preemptive strike against Hezbollah, in Lebanon. According to the reports, Prime Minister Netanyahu luckily overruled Gallant. Now, there's been skirmishes in the border area. Last week, we shared some details about what happened to a Lebanese grandmother and her 3 grandchildren as she was near the Lebanese-Israeli border. Israel did an airstrike, wiped her out. She died along with her 3 grandchildren. An Israeli source said Austin asked Gallant for clarification about Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon and asked that Israel avoid steps that could lead to an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah. Gallant told Austin Israeli policy is not to open a second front in Lebanon and stressed that he doesn't think such a scenario is going to happen, the Israeli source said. And Gallant also told Austin that Hezbollah is escalating attacks, including a drone attack from Syria on the city of Eilat, 350 miles away. Hezbollah is playing with fire, Gallant told Austin. But their rhetoric on social media is pretty clear. They keep making points about how, Hezbollah comes for us. We're gonna do to the Lebanese citizens, civilians, what we've been doing to Palestinians in Gaza, which is quite an admission for those who continue to provide cover for the brutality that the Israeli government is carrying out against Palestinian civilians in both the Gaza Strip and, let's keep it real, also in the West Bank.
Okay, so we've been criticizing the Biden administration plenty for their actions in this war, seemingly unabated green light to the Israeli government. But here we go. Here's a situation where we finally have a report of not a green light. So credit where credit is due. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, thank you for trying to quell the conflict so that it doesn't spread. We appreciate that, and that's part of the Biden administration. So credit to Biden if he's having his defense secretary go out there and make sure that the war does not get broader, okay? So now, historically and in this conflict how much Biden has backed Israel. And so that gives you some insight into how much it's Israel that's trying to start this conflict with Lebanon and Hezbollah as opposed to Hezbollah starting it. Like if you said to me Hezbollah is starting the conflict, I'd believe that in a second. Hezbollah and Hamas have started plenty of conflicts with Israel. But here's the US government saying, no, we think Israel's starting it. That is incredibly telling. The US government never says that, even if it's true. So here they are going, no, don't make the war broader. That's crazy. And by the way, a very rare piece of credit, if this reporting is correct, to Netanyahu, the first one I might have ever given him, if he prevented Gallant from starting a preemptive strike and a preemptive war with Lebanon. You know what another word for preemptive war is? A war of aggression, offensive war, a war you started. And so apparently Yoav Gallant is a lunatic. I mean, the defense secretary for Israel is apparently mentally unbalanced if Netanyahu has to check you because you're trying to start too many wars and kill too many civilians.
I have to give you a few more details because a Biden senior advisor by the name of Amos Hochstein visited Lebanon just last week to deliver a message to not escalate the situation, right? The impression the Biden administration got during and after Hochstein's visit was the Lebanese government and public as well as Hezbollah are not interested in a war with Israel, 2 sources with knowledge of the situation said. In fact, Biden administration officials are satisfied that Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, made it clear that they are not, it was a speech last week, we covered it briefly, but did not want to escalate toward war with Israel. Hezbollah does not want that, probably because Hezbollah knows that the United States government and its military has the Israeli government's back. And they don't want to get into a broader war. But I mean, how do you sit back and watch the slaughter of Palestinian civilians? How do you sit back and watch, the Israeli government launch their own airstrikes, against, people in Lebanon, like slaughtering a grandmother and her 3 grandchildren? The belligerent behavior of the Israeli government is going to drag us into a massive war. Netanyahu, Cenk, do not give him any credit. None. Netanyahu, since 2015, has been trying to goad the United States into a war with Iran. He wants it, he's thirsty for it, okay? He doesn't care that we would be sacrificing the men and women in our military to fight his war. He doesn't care. And what do we get out of it? More hostility directed toward the United States as we provide cover for the war crimes that the Israeli government is carrying out right now. No, I do not agree with that.
Yeah, so you might be wondering why as Israel is reeling from the worst attack they've had ever, why would they want a broader war? Well, there is an answer to that, and the reporting bears it out. They want to drag America into the war, and so they think if it's a broader war, America will be forced to join on their side, and that way they could broaden it also to Iran and try to destroy Iran as well. They can't handle Iran on their own, but if they make America fight their war, then they'll be able to what? Why? Why would you even get into a war with Iran? Are you nuts? Are you a lunatic? Iran right now doesn't have nukes, doesn't have anything along those lines. And by the way, they were in a peace deal where we took out all of their uranium. So they couldn't possibly have nukes. But no, Netanyahu said, rip up that deal. So now they couldn't get uranium again, which makes them more dangerous. This is absolute lunacy. And so look, sorry, but the American people didn't sign up for this. 2/3 of Americans right now want a ceasefire, let alone war with Lebanon or Iran. Nobody wants war. The right wing doesn't want war. The left wing doesn't want war. The only people that want war are the people in Washington. Okay, and even at this point, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin doesn't apparently even want a broader war. But if Israel thinks, hey, not if they get attacked, but if they do a preemptive strike on Lebanon or Iran, there's no way in the world we should join them. You want to start a war and then have American kids die on your behalf and sit back and enjoy this? No way, no way. We should not help them if they start the wars. And by the way, the occupation should end immediately because the occupation drives all of this conflict in the first place, and it is totally unjustifiable. The only excuse for occupation is racism. So period. 56 years is not enough, it's insanity. So, a no to all these wars, but again, I'll go back to credit to Austin and Biden for at least trying to make sure that it's contained and does not turn into something that swallows up the entire Middle East and drags America and kills our kids as well in this totally and utterly senseless war.
Ukraine was behind the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines. We'll tell you how and why when we come back.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.